Have you researched Columbia, watched every video you can find, and still feel lost? I get it. If that sounds like you, you're not alone. And you may be surprised by what I'm about to show you, because by the end of this video, you'll know exactly which neighborhood is the best fit for you. We're not talking fluff clickbait or top 10 neighborhoods regurgitated off a ChatGPT prompt. We have literally helped over 100 buyers relocate right here to the area after making the move ourselves. So we're giving the straight up details that honestly, most people in most videos overlook when it comes to relocating. So let's get after it. All right, so everybody loves to jump straight into searching for homes that match their criteria. But honestly, that's the easy part of our job. I can literally find you a house you'll love in almost every corner of Columbia. I mean, it's why you see so many videos trying to get you to fall in love with a pretty southern home with a price that just seems too good to be true. But the truth is, what's outside those four walls, that's where the real decision lives. Look, you're not just picking a place to lay your head. This isn't a hotel. This is where you'll raise your kids, settle into retirement while binge watching reruns of MASH, or welcome that first baby home. That's why before we chase square footage and bedrooms, we need to step back and figure out where your life fits best. Because the right neighborhood will make or break how happy you feel in the home you choose. Trust me, you can't just blindly throw a dart here based on a budget and a few listing photos and hope it sticks. Because my goal isn't to just help you buy a home, it's to help you land in a place that still feels right years from now. Or hey, at least you can still sell if life does change. So grab a notepad and write down your top 3 lifestyle must-have. Things like commute time, school zones, walkability, lake access, or just quiet evenings on the porch. Keep that list handy as we go, because the reality is there's no I want it all here in Columbia. There's some give and take, and not always because of budget, simply because Columbia is kind of built different, but we'll get into that. So let's help you cut through the noise and spot your neighborhood when we start exploring the options. All right, so let's start with a broad overview before we zoom in on each area and each spot. Before we talk neighborhoods though, we need to get our bearings with downtown Columbia and the major interstates. All right, so let's get started with the fact that Columbia is found central in the state of South Carolina, and it is the capital of South Carolina. Now, with that said, Columbia is about 2 hours to Charleston. It's going to be about 3 hours to Myrtle Beach. You're about an hour and a half from Charlotte, North Carolina. You're about an hour and a half to Greenville, South Carolina. And you're going to be about 3 hours to Atlanta, Georgia. Now, when we're referring to the Columbia region, what we're really referring to is kind of as far east as about the Camden area, south heading over from Eastover, Swansea, Pillion, heading over to the west side of Lake Murray, and then heading north kind of into Chapin and then up into Blythewood this direction. Now, you got some of the major interstates that we'll talk about, and these are really important, and we'll talk about actual commute times as we dive into the areas further. But you got I-20 that kind of spans east to the west, kind of bordering the north part of the city right here. As well, you have I-26, another major route that's going to run right on the west side of the city, heading down this way back to Charleston. Then you got I-77 that's kind of a loop around the city and then heads up this direction to Charlotte. You'll often hear about what people call malfunction junction, which is going to be this corridor right here, where not only these two interstates come together, but there's also a little runoff here, 126, that dumps you into downtown Columbia. This is going to be kind of one of the major traffic sticking points. And again, we'll talk about commute times later on, but it's key to know depending on what side of town you live on. Because as you can see, from the west side over in Batesburg, Leesville, to the east side over in Camden, you're over an hour to cross town. And so that's where we say those commute times do become important, but we'll dive into those more later when we dive into the specific suburbs. And just real quick, we have to talk about the waterways. You have the broad river that comes from the north down to the south, and it's going to meet right here with the Saluda River, which feeds off of Lake Murray. And when they meet together over here in Columbia, they form what is called the Congaree River heading down this direction. Congaree River is kind of that border of Columbia, but that's why you'll hear about the Three Rivers area, where these three rivers come together. And of course, that leads us to Lake Murray, another big attraction of the area just west of Columbia. It's a 50,000 acre lake. It's made up of 4 different counties, and we'll talk about the areas that surround it. But for reference real quick, when we're talking about how big the lake is, as you can see, a full loop around the lake, not exploring every single cove, can take you almost 2 hours to hopefully give you proximity of the lake. Again, we'll dive into these areas a little bit further later on. Now, the last thing we need to talk about before we dive in further is going to be the hospital systems. This is something people ask about a lot. So we have a multitude of hospital systems throughout the area, but your largest hospital system is going to be Prisma Health. This is where your major trauma center is going to be, pediatric center, and so much more, and that's going to be in downtown Columbia. Now, the next big hospital system you're going to hear about is Lexington Medical Center. And as you can see, it's kind of on that western side of Columbia, just into West Columbia. Now, the next largest hospital system is going to be MUSC Health. They acquired Providence Health System a couple years back, and their main facility is going to be in downtown Columbia as well. And the last hospital system we talk about is going to be the Dorn VA for our veterans. It's going to be found on the southeast side of Columbia. Now, with most of these hospital systems, they are going to have satellite hospitals outside of the ones I showed you. MUSC is going to have a facility up here in the northeast part of Columbia. Lexington has a facility up here in northeast part of Columbia. Prisma Health is building a medical center up here in northeast Columbia. As well, over on the west side, Prisma Health has a satellite hospital. And of course, there are urgent care spread throughout the entire area. But let's dive into these areas a little bit further. Columbia is the capital of South Carolina, so downtown is where you'll find the State House. You'll find the University of South Carolina campus and entertainment districts like the Vista and Divine Street. Think high-end steakhouses, rooftop bars, live music, and date night spots. And it's also where you'll find Segra Park, home to the Columbia Fireflies minor league baseball team, and they also host other events there throughout the year. I mean, you got Colonial Life Arena for concerts, Township Auditorium for smaller shows and comedy. Plus, you got Williams-Brice Stadium for Gamecocks football. I kind of call it a small, big city. You get nightlife and energy, but it never feels overwhelming. And of course, just east of downtown sits Fort Jackson, a huge military base that plays a big role in the local economy and brings a steady flow of people in and out of the area. So here's what we're gonna do. I'm gonna give you a quick flyover of each area now, help you to kind of start narrowing things down. Then later in this video, we'll dig deeper so you can truly match your budget and lifestyle to that right pocket of the city. Again, this is the step most people skip and they jump straight into those listing videos and pictures. And it's the one though that truly makes or breaks the move. And hey, real quick, if you're finding this helpful, consider subscribing because my goal has always been to do this differently. As I personally get it, we relocated here ourselves. That's why we're not just sitting reading ChatGPT scripts. This is the real boots on the ground stuff to actually show you what life is like in these neighborhoods. The stuff, honestly, you usually don't find out until after living here or talking to the locals. But either way, let's get back to the good stuff. Let's start with Lexington because this is where a lot of people land first. Really, you can think of it as two sides split by I-20. South Lexington, places like Red Bank and White Knoll in the 29073 zip code. A little bit more space, plenty of bang for your buck. And you got North Lexington, the 29072 side, where you'll find downtown Lexington. It borders Lake Murray. It's where you'll find top-rated schools, more shopping, and the quickest access to the lake. You'll find newer neighborhoods on both sides of Lexington. Next up is Irmo, tucked between Lake Murray on one side and the Broad River on the other. You got I-26 running right down the middle. It's kind of a patchwork, part Lexington County, part Richland County, a mix of Irmo and Columbia zip codes. This is why a lot of people get confused about this area. Now, one side feels a little more spread out and wooded. The other side, a little more older suburban and more dense. Now, we'll break those differences down a little bit later. Head west of Irmo and you hit Chapin, a smaller town that's growing pretty fast. It's known as the capital of Lake Murray because water kind of surrounds it. Lots of coves, docks, and homes right on the lake. Think small town vibes, less chain stores, a little bit longer commutes, but more new construction popping up every year. Over on the other side of town, you got the Northeast, which is the more traditional suburban sprawl. I mean, think big master plan communities, golf course neighborhoods, malls, and big box shopping. It's popular if you want newer homes and amenities, but it's also denser and feels less small town than Lexington or Chapin. Now, closer to downtown, you got places like Forest Acres, Shandon, Heathwood, and others. Think classic Columbia neighborhoods with tree-lined streets and those homes with character. Now, these are older established areas where you can actually walk to shops, restaurants, and coffee spots depending on where you land. Now, they don't have big neighborhood amenities like pools or clubhouses, but they've got history and charm that new construction just can't touch. Now, if you're craving a little more space and a little more rural, you got places like Elgin, Gaston, Pillion, Swansea, and even parts of Gilbert or Batesburg. You can get land and privacy, but you'll trade for longer drives to shopping and dining. I mean, it's amazing how quickly the scenery changes. You can literally go from golf course suburban neighborhoods to nothing but 2-lane roads and Dollar General in just minutes. And then there's Lake Murray itself, a 50,000 acre playground that stretches through 4 counties. Some parts feel suburban. Some are totally rural. All right, so let's get kicked off with the Lexington area. Now, this is a fast-growing suburb for numerous reasons. They have top-rated high schools, Lake Murray access, as you can see. And this is usually one of the hot spots that has a lot of people reaching out to us for. There's a lot of hype online, a lot of forums tell people this is the area to move to for numerous reasons that we will dive into. Now, with that said, less than half of our clients actually bought in the Lexington zip codes. That's right. More than half actually chose other areas, and we're going to hit on them. So that's why you want to stick around, because you'll notice there's plenty of options that may check your box that people just aren't talking about online as much. But let's break down these areas. And before we dive specifically into the specific Lexington areas, sometimes there's a little bit of confusion around Lexington because you do have Lexington County, which encompasses a very large area, as you can see. But within that, you also have zip codes that have the Lexington name. First, you're going to have that 29072 zip code on the north side of I-20. Then you're also going to have the 29073 zip code, which is going to be on the south side of I-20. Another reason you'll hear the name South Lexington. And then also within, you're going to have the town of Lexington, smaller area within that 29072 zip code. Now, without confusing people more, you also have the Lexington 1 school district. You have the Lexington Richland 5 school district. Now, obviously, those are based on the county names, but then within there, you have Lexington High School. So again, I know there's a lot of confusion around the names of Lexington, but what we're talking about right now when we're talking about these areas is going to be these two areas here, 29072 Lexington and 29073 Lexington. Again, the biggest divider that we use to help people kind of give idea of the area is going to be the interstate I-20. And we will get commute times later, but that's why it's important to understand where this is relative to the two different parts of Lexington as you're looking up homes and areas. Now, with that said, schools, right? Like I said, this is another reason a lot of people attract to the area. When you pull up a lot of these sites, you see Lexington High School, as well as River Bluff High School, often rank as some of the top in the states. As well, when you pull up school districts, that Lexington 1 school district does rank really high within the state. So this is obviously one of the big reasons that attracts people to the area. Now, as we break down each of these areas, there are differences between the two. So when we pull up the terrain view, one of the biggest differences I tell people is this area, definitely as you zoom in, you can see a little more densely populated. You're gonna have a little bit more shopping over there, a little bit more neighborhoods, more restaurants and things like that. Where the south side over here, still a little bit more rural. Yes, you're gonna have your major grocery stores and things like that, but not as many restaurants, not as many options, but we'll dive into that. But as we dive into that north side of Lexington, obviously one of the big draws to the area is going to be Main Street Lexington. Right here, Main Street Lexington is where you're going to have the Ice House Amphitheater, where they host local events, concerts, and things like that. It's also where you have restaurants you may have heard of. O'Hare's Public House, Barrio Tacos, Taco Sushi, and so many other great restaurants right here in this corridor. As well, you have many parks and ponds, as recently the Old Mill Pond, where they built a walking trail around this entire pond. You have Gibson Park on this pond over here. And you have the Virginia Hilton Park that they built right off of Main Street, Lexington. Now, as I mentioned before, you got a lot more options when it comes to shopping on this side of town. The biggest one you'll probably hear about, as you can see, there's different shopping complexes out this other direction, but Highway 378 Sunset Boulevard. This down here is going to have a ton of different shopping. You're talking about Home Depot, you're talking about Target, Hobby Lobby, and so many others. Now, one of the cons of this, and you've probably heard it online already, is about traffic. Yes, this area here, the pro of having all the shopping there, is also the con where during rush hour, this just can line with traffic. And again, I'll talk about commute times in a minute. And so it all kind of bottlenecks together in downtown Lexington right here. And so traffic is going to be one of the biggest complaints that we hear about this area when people visit or when people move to the area, that the traffic is just too much. Now, again, as I mentioned before, one of the big pros is going to be that Lake Murray access. Of course, within the area, you're going to have tons of homes along the lake right here, as well as you have some lake neighborhoods in here. But again, of course, that public access to Lake Murray. So you have the 1.7 mile dam walk right here. And on the Lexington side, you're going to have a year-round parking lot where you can park and just take a walk across the dam. Now, during the season, there's also this public park that you can see here, where they have a beach that you can come and enjoy without having boats running around everywhere. Now on the north side, it's going to be on the Irmo side, but obviously on this Lexington, you still have proximity to it. Is going to be year round. There's a boat launch over here. Now, during the season, it is paid, but after the end of the season, the guard leaves and for free, you can come and launch their boat. So obviously that's the benefit of it. Now, there are other boat launches throughout the area that you can access as you start to head more west in Lexington this way. But again, Lake Murray is another big reason people like this area, just that proximity to it. Now, let's head to the south side of Lexington, and then we'll dive into some more of those cons, because some of the cons actually encompass both sides of it. Now, as we zoom in here, like I said, there's going to be a little bit more rural of an area as you switch the layer here. You can see not as densely populated. And so with that said, you don't have as many shopping complexes on you do on the other side. I'll tell you right now, I live on this side of town. A lot of times we go out to eat, we're going to this side of town over here. You know, we do have, of course, you have your Walmarts over here. You have Publix, recently building a Lowe's grocery store, all going to be around this region right here. So we can get all that grocery stuff done. We can go to Lowe's Home Improvement to get that stuff. But anything major, you're having to drive up to that side of Lexington. So that's going to be one of the big differences. As well, again, a little bit more rural of a lay of the land. So it's not going to be as polished of an area as the north side of Lexington might feel. Now, there is a price difference between the two that we'll get into just a little bit after we talk about the cons and then, of course, your commute times that you might expect over here. So when it comes to commute times, as you can see right now, it's saying it's about 21 minutes to get from downtown Lexington to downtown Columbia. And from that south side of Lexington, as you can see, you can avoid the interstate, little less than 30 minutes to downtown Columbia, about the same amount of commute time if you take the interstate. Now, remember what I talked about earlier with malfunction junction. One of the benefits people find about South Lexington is you can avoid the interstate if that does start to bottleneck and back up. Where on that north side, you have less options, and even 378 here can start to back up, or Highway 1 trying to cut through this direction. Now, with that said, obviously, one of the things to keep in mind is depending on where you end up living in Lexington, because if we go back to a neighborhood on the far western side of Lexington on the lake, as you can see, it pushes that even further to a 35-minute commute, and that's showing that there's very little traffic right now. We're simply moving to a neighborhood on that far east side, as you can see, cuts that commute time down to 21 minutes. So that's why I tell people commute times can quickly become an issue depending on where you land. All right, now let's talk about the cons that drive people away from the Lexington area that I hear most often. So one, as we kind of already talked about, traffic, right? With the rapid growth, you have rising prices on top of it. You have traffic, and you have new construction popping up more than some people like. They just feel like the area is starting to become overdeveloped. It's not as much of a small town as many people expect. As well, one of the other big cons I hear is that you have few walkable districts, right? A lot of people look for those master plan communities, and we do have some areas of town that do have them, but we have less of them and less true in that traditional sense over here in Lexington, where you can truly live in that neighborhood and walk and go grab ice cream. Walk your kid to the elementary school. You're very car dependent in Lexington just because of the lay of the land out here. And so those are the big reasons I hear people draw away from the Lexington area. Now, with that said, on both the north side of Lexington and the south side, you're going to have a variety of different price points. You have plenty of new construction options on both the north side as well as the south side with lots of growth. But as well, you do have some older established neighborhoods. And then, of course, you have those lake homes and some lake neighborhoods. Now, as I mentioned earlier, and we'll start in the 29072 zip code, if you isolate single family homes with at least 3 bedrooms and 2 baths, minimum of what I hear people asking for, and we leave out those lakefront properties as we'll isolate those specifically, the average price in that area is sitting around $430,000. Now, on the south side of Lexington, like I said, your money goes a little bit further, and their average since the beginning of the year was $305,000. Next, we're going to slide over to Northeast Columbia. This is another hotspot that a lot of people zero in on when they start their search. Now, it's a totally different vibe from Lexington. And for some buyers, it checks boxes that some they didn't even know they had. And don't go anywhere yet, because after we break down this area, we're going to circle back around Lake Murray. And then we'll hit a few spots that you'll definitely want to keep on your radar and are some of those that aren't talked about as much online. But when we talk about Northeast Columbia, The name obviously comes from the fact that it sits northeast of Columbia. Now, with Northeast Columbia, it's going to be made up of multiple different school districts, multiple different zip codes, and all kinds of things. And so it can get a little bit confusing in here when trying to figure out exactly where to narrow down. But let me give you kind of that overlay of it. So coming out of Columbia, you got I-77 heading up this direction, heading north. And then heading on the east side, you have I-20 going this direction here. Now, obviously, a lot of this down here is going to be Fort Jackson. So you're going to see there's a little bit on this side of the interstate, but majority is going to sit right here within this triangle before we head into the Elgin area. Now, on this top part of Northeast Columbia, you do have Blythewood. Now, Blythewood in all senses does encompass the northeast part of Columbia, but I will break it down a little bit separately because I know I have people that specifically ask for this area. Now, again, like I said, the lay of the land here is a little bit different. When we switch the layers map here, as you can see, now let me clear this because as I did it, as you can see, it zoomed in a little bit, but you can see in this section here is really what we're talking about. And this becomes important when we start talking about the more rural areas because you can see how quick it shifts from this densely populated area to a rural just on that other side. Either way, let's dive into this section a little bit further. Now, this area developed a lot during the 90s and 2000s. And so this is where you're going to have that more traditional suburban sprawl that we talk about, where you have those big master plan communities, you have those golf course neighborhoods, tons of new construction out there, tons of big box retail, restaurants. You have the Village at Sand Hills Outdoor Mall. Again, multiple country clubs and so much more. More of that traditional sense when people talk about suburbia. As well, you have another really popular neighborhood, master plan community in the area, Lake Carolina. And that neighborhood is going to be right up here. Now, I tell people all the time when we talk about lakes, Lake Carolina, this is a private lake for that neighborhood. So yes, you do have to live in that neighborhood if you want access to Lake Carolina. You can opt into that. Completely different video that I talk about Lake Carolina specifically. But I have a lot of people that are like, hey, can we go use Lake Carolina? If you don't live in the neighborhood, you're not going to be able to buy into that. Either way, circling it back, again, you have tons of different master plan communities outside of Lake Carolina. Obviously, that one being popular because they do have a downtown in there with not a ton. You're not going to have all your grocery shopping and everything that you think of in these big master plan suburbs that we see around the country. But again, there's a little restaurant down there. There's a convenience store. All the rest of your shopping is going to be outside the neighborhood, and you are going to be still car dependent for the rest of it. Now, again, there are plenty of other popular neighborhoods in this area. Wildwood, Country Club neighborhood. On this east side, you're going to have Wood Creek Farms, another country club neighborhood made up of multiple different styles of homes, including some of the most expensive homes in our entire area. And then you're going to have the Summit, another master plan community made up of multiple different subsections. And then right smack dab in the middle of one of the busiest roads they have, which we'll get into just a little bit, you have Sesquicentennial State Park. So this is a state park. And it's unique because 1 minute you're driving down this busy road, passing homes, shops, and so much more. And the next, there's this entrance to Sesquicentennial State Park where it feels like an escape from the city. If you go out there, they have different ponds, waterfalls, walking trails, so much more to do out there. Now, we have to roll into the cons of this area. What takes people away from this area? And the realistic truth is the pros are also what creates the cons. So being that it is these bigger master plan community, you have less of that small town feel when it comes to the town centers. Again, you're talking about big chain shopping centers. You're not talking about these downtown strips where you park and walk and get ice cream. You're talking about going to the mall. You're talking about going to strip malls and all this type of such. So less of that small town feel. As again, well, because it's more densely populated, you get a lot of traffic. This road I pointed out earlier, Highway 1, Two Notch Road heading down this way. Definitely you get a lot of congestion in that area. Now, one of the biggest for the longest time was going to be Hardscrabble Road cutting right through here back to the interstate. Now, this was a widening project that took way too long to complete, but they did recently complete it and it's helped out a lot. But obviously being as much of a growing area as it is, as densely populated as it is, traffic is going to be a big issue out here as well. Now, being that is a big area, obviously commute times are going to vary widely depending on where you land. As you can see, from Lake Carolina to downtown Columbia, saying about 33-minute drive. But I know people that live out there that says that drive can push really quick. Now, head over to Wood Creek Farms. As you can see, 25 minutes, a little bit closer to the interstate, a little less of that in-town traffic that you're going to have to deal with getting back to the interstate. Now, with that said, with some of the new construction in the area and the other neighborhoods, the closer you are, as you can see, easy commute back to Fort Jackson. We do get a lot of military that end up in this northeast corridor, not just in the close end, but because of these commute times. Now let's dive into that overall average pricing again. So what we're looking at in Northeast Columbia is $353,000. Now I tell people Northeast Columbia is probably one of the most diverse areas when it comes to pricing, because you have everything from some of the lowest price homes in our entire market to some of the highest price homes in our entire market and everything in between. There's a lot of variety here. Again, this is one of those big areas where one block may be $1 million homes, and then you leave that subsection and you come across and it's $180,000 homes. There's a lot of variance in this area. And these blanket averages don't always tell the full story, but again, hopefully it gives you a general perspective on average what you can expect in this area. Now, I do want to dive into Blythewood separately. As I said, it is a part of Northeast Columbia, but I know so many people specifically ask for this area. Now, just like Lexington, you have the Blythewood zip code that we're going to talk about, 29016. But in the same accord, you also have the town of Blythewood and their town limits. And so as you can see, makes up that area here. But otherwise, backing out to this area, I've told people all the time, this is a very rural area. However, it grew differently than a lot of the other rural areas we're talking about. What do I mean by that? You have a lot more of those master plan communities in this area, even being rural. You have neighborhoods, as you can see, the Columbia Country Club over here. You have neighborhoods like Cobblestone Park, Ashley Oaks, and then we're seeing a ton more new construction popping up in the area with amenities and so much more. Something that you usually don't see as much in the rural parts of our area. And so that's attracted a lot of people to the area. Now, one of the other big things you've probably heard about if you've watched my videos or if you research Blythewood at all is going to be Scout Motors. Now, for those that don't know what I'm talking about, and I'm going to pull up the satellite here as I zoom into the area where Scout Motors is being built. Scout Motors, Scout was an SUV many years ago, was a Bronco competition, went away, and now Volkswagen owns the right to Scout, and they're building an EV vehicle. And Blythewood was chosen for that plant, part of the plant of where this EV is being built. And as you can see, this massive area here, construction is currently going on right now with vehicles looking to be coming off the lot in the next couple years. Now, obviously, this is a big change for people living in the Blythewood area, being, as I said, the more rural areas. So, a lot of questions about this I've heard. In the midst of construction, yeah, there's a lot of mess out there, as you can imagine. But in the same sense, they're doing a lot of construction. Blythewood Road right here, widening this road. From my understanding, there's supposed to be a direct exit off the interstate right here. In the midst of it, though, there's a lot of questions, a lot of concern about what the future of this is going to look like. Just had someone message me the other day, hey, there's a lot of homes for sale in the Blythewood area. What is going on? One, as I've talked about in any of my market reports, and we'll talk about later, there's a lot of those master plan communities. And with that, right now, they're having a hard time competing against new construction. This is not something that is isolated to Blythewood itself. We're seeing in all parts of towns, those homes that are 2 years old, 5 years old, are having a hard time to compete with the incentives new construction is offering. As well, again, I've had people reach out to me recently that said they live within close proximity to Scout Motors and they're concerned that the congestion and traffic is going to be too much. Now, with that said, to ease some people's tension, I have had clients that are working at Scout Motors, and they told me that Scout Motors, their intent is to not have a massive impact on the local area when it comes to that. And so they have a ton of plans to help with the roads and mitigate traffic so people don't feel this way. Now I get it. In the midst of all the construction, until that dust settles, it's not going to feel this way. And so that's why a lot of people are questioning that. But with that said, I still have a ton of people moving to the area, those that are working for Scout, and tons more that actually aren't working for Scout because they do fall in love with the area. Because again, as you can see here, even though you do have these master plan communities, you still got a lot of trees and green space. It's just still a very rural area. So a lot of people feel like living in these neighborhoods, they get a little bit more peace and quiet than you do get in the suburbs. But in the same accord, you're not going to be too far from downtown Columbia. As you can see here, about a 24-minute drive down the interstate, obviously depending on where you live in Blythewood as well. Another big thing that a lot of people like about Blythewood is that much closer to the Charlotte area. Talking an hour and 17 minutes. So those that like the international airport in closer distance, those that go to Charlotte for the bigger shopping, the bigger dining and things like that. As well, I'll be 100% honest, I've had clients in the past that actually work part-time in Charlotte, and that's why they lived in Blythewood, because Charlotte's gotten so expensive and their money went further and they didn't mind that hour commute to get to work. And of course, if you watch my recent videos, just outside of Blythewood, you have Oak Hills Country Club. That's where they're saying the Crystal Lagoons is going to be built. I tell people all the time, don't start calling, asking to buy a home in Crystal Lagoons. It's still years out. They're early phases of this, but either way. Now, circling back, what are the cons biggest I hear about Blythewood? So the biggest things I hear is, again, keep in mind, this is still a very rural area. When it comes to shopping, you're not going to have a Target right there, 5 minutes away from your house. You're going to be driving a little bit further. Sure, you can get your grocery shopping done right here, and you can go down a couple exits to the Killian exit. Super Kroger, Walmart's over there, a little bit more restaurants and shops and things like that. But again, some people just feel it's still a little bit too far out and a little bit rural. As well, again, the concerns about the Scout Motors plant, of course, in the midst of the construction can feel that way. But a lot of people I have are buying a little bit further out of the town center, and they absolutely love it out there. So again, lots of pros and cons to this area. And before I forget, another reason a lot of people are attracted to this area is because Blythewood High School does land pretty high on a lot of these websites as well. And circling back to pricing, Blythewood is one of those areas where that average price is going to be higher than what we saw in most of Northeast Columbia, sitting at $402,000 average for the year. So again, being more rural, this isn't one of those budget-friendly areas that we'll talk about later. All right, so like I said, wrapping up from Blythewood, we're heading back over to Lake Murray, and we're going to be checking out two different areas over here. We're talking about Irmo and Chapin. These are two different areas, but they're popular spots that kind of bring their own twist on Lake Murray living, different than what we saw over in Lexington. Again, after that, we're going to swing back into those downtown historic districts. We're talking Forest Acres, Shandon, and more to show you what that in-town charm really feels like. And then we're going to wrap up in those rural pockets. Again, this is where your dollar starts to stretch further, and it's going to be different than what we saw over in Blythewood. Again, each stop has a totally different vibe, and you're definitely going to want to stick around to see which one kind of fits your lifestyle, because some of these are often overlooked with generalization. And of course, after, like I said, we're going to dive into Lake Murray. Irmo, another very popular area we talk about. And before I show you these layers here, one of the big confusions that happens here in Irmo, kind of what we saw in some of the other areas, is one, you have the town of Irmo. And so these are the town of Irmo limits. And as you can see, it really doesn't encompass a lot of this area that we're talking about. After that, you also have the zip code of Irmo, 29063. And as you can see, same thing, really only encompasses this north side of it. So you're missing all this down here, which is actually a Columbia zip code. And then just one more twist on this to make it a little bit confusing that happens all the time is actually county lines. This is the Lexington County line down here, and this is the Richland County side. So again, I know this area creates a little bit of confusion when people are trying to home search in the area. They feel like they're missing things. And later on, I will tell you what I tell my clients to make sure that they're seeing every home available within the Irmo area and not missing those. Now, with that said, to give you a general idea about the area, and I will switch the layers back here. A lot of this area was built 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s. Some of it newer, but more on this side of town, and we'll talk about that in a second. But with that, you kind of had that more suburban sprawl, similar to what we saw over in Northeast Columbia, with a lot more chain stores and less of that small town feel that you per se have in Lexington and that we'll see over in Chapin. And so it creates a little bit of confusion with this area as well. Now, where it's different than what we saw in Northeast Columbia is, again, 60s, 70s, 80s homes. So you got these older homes, established neighborhoods that have that character that a lot of people seek out. So that's another reason people do seek out this area. But again, circling back, you have big chain shopping, Harbison Boulevard right here. You'll hear about it from locals. every chain store you can think of right in this area, as well as the Columbiana Center Mall, the mall on this side of town. As well, you have Costco over on this side of town. You have Sam's Club over on this side of town. We do have other Sam's Club on other parts of town, but if you're looking for Costco, it's the one and only Costco over here. And recently announced that they're going to be building the second Trader Joe's. So again, you get a little bit more of that chain shopping than that small town vibe. And that's just the dynamics of those older suburban areas. Now, with that said, I break this into two different parts when it comes to Irmo. And the interstate is the best way to split it, 26 right here. And as you can see, it kind of borders on the Broad River on this top side here as well. But you have two different sides. This side up here is what I like to call the best of both worlds side. What do I mean by that? As you can see, a little less densely populated, a little more spread out. So this is when one person in the couple says, you know, I don't want to be in the big suburbs. I don't want to feel like I'm in the city. I want to have a little bit more space. This kind of checks the boxes to them. But the other couple says, I'm with you on that. I'm willing to compromise, but at the same accord, I don't want to drive 30 to 40 minutes just to get some good grocery shopping done, which you get in some of the more rural areas. We're here just on the other side of the interstate. You get that. So that's why I call it the best of both worlds side. Now, in the same accord, this south side has a lot of benefits too that a lot of people attract the area. You have these older established neighborhood, and one of the big things with them, they were non-HOA neighborhoods. Neighborhoods like Whitehall over here and so many others. These older established neighborhood, tree-lined streets with character. Now, one thing we've seen recently start to pop up in these areas, in Irmo specifically, as you can see, even though there's no HOAs in the town limits, under new rules, heavy-duty commercial vehicles, including semi-trucks, box trucks, and oversized tow trucks, may no longer be parked in front yards or on residential streets anywhere visible to homeowners. As well, recreational vehicles, boats, and personal trailers may still be parked in driveways for now. However, starting July 1st, 2026, parking them on the grass or front lawns will be prohibited. Vehicles must be stored in backyard, behind structures, or offsite in commercial or rented storage facilities. So I tell people all the time, no, they're not coming in telling you can't put an above ground pool in your backyard, but they are starting to regulate a little bit on the aesthetics of that neighborhood. So something to keep in mind if that's you. Now, of course, the other big draw to the Irmo area is going to be that access to Lake Murray. As we talked about before, you have that North Lake Dam recreation area where you can launch boats, and this is where you start to see some restaurants on the water, a lot more marinas on the water over here, Liberty on the Lake, Catfish Johnny's, and so many more. So I know a lot of people seek out to this area simply because, hey, I don't have an HOA, I can park a boat in my backyard and be able to quickly get to Lake Murray and launch my boat out there. Now, before we dive into the cons, let's talk about another one of the big pros that attracts people to this area, which is going to lead into how I help people isolate this area. So anyone that's been looking online, Lexington Richland School District 5 is one of the top ranked schools in the state, as you can see. And that does encompass the Irmo, Dutch Fork, and Chapin schools. And that rolls into how I tell my clients to best isolate these areas. Whether it matters to you or not, isolate them by the high schools. If you hit that Irmo High School area and that Dutch Fork High School area, that's going to help isolate these two areas here so you can best isolate that home search into these two areas. All right, let's talk commute times, and then we're going to talk about those cons. So as you can see from Irmo to downtown Columbia, you're only talking 17 minutes. Another big pro of the area is it's an easy commute. Now, as you saw, you have those more rural areas that push out further. Popular neighborhood up this direction, Ascot, as you can see, still only 23 minutes to downtown. So obviously, depending on where you are, can fluctuate the commute, but one of the easier commutes into downtown Columbia. All right, now let's talk about the cons that I hear from people of why this area doesn't attract to them when they come visit. So one is going to be what I talked about earlier. A lot of people assume this is just kind of a small town, similar to Lexington, and they drive around looking for that quaint downtown strip, and they can't find it, and all they find is the mall and the commercial strips. And I tell people, yeah, that's it. And so it doesn't have as much as a small town feel. Now, with that said, you got Moore Park here where they host community events. Their big festival that they've had for over 50 years, the Irmo Ochre Strut, just happened September 26th and 27th. And they say they average 25,000 attendees at these areas. Again, lots of big festivals in the area, even though it is that bigger suburban sprawl kind of feel. The second thing I hear often is going to be the mix of school ratings. Yes, like I talked about, a lot of these sites put the school district high, but when you're talking to parents, a lot of them will tell you not all school rating is the same. So do your research on those sites, help narrow it down to what suits you and your family best. Now, one of the other big cons I've seen in this area is, again, a lot of people love the idea of older established neighborhoods, but with that, you're talking about older homes. And I've seen it a lot of times where people come in here, and especially on the kind of budget friendly side, and they get one of those older homes, and that inspection report comes and all they see is dollar signs after dollar signs. And oftentimes they go, hey, let's go look at a newer home where that inspection report doesn't look as long. And then lastly, one of the other big cons I see about this area before we talk about pricing and move over to Chapin is going to be flood zones. Now, I tell people all the time, this is not something that covers the entire area. Don't feel like you have to avoid the area if you don't want to live in a floodplain. I have sold numerous homes in the Irmo and Dutch Fork area and have yet to had one person that was required to have flood insurance or in the history of the house had flooded due to rising waters. But you got to keep in mind that you have the Saluda River that runs right here off of Lake Burn. You have all these creeks and streams that run in here, and they can start to create issues with floodplains. Now, I tell people all the time, the last thing you want to do is go on these real estate websites that say this is a rating of a 2 flood risk or a 3. It's not the best way to do this. The best thing is to go to the FEMA flood map. This is public. This isn't just for real estate agents. This is how insurance companies actually determine whether or not you're required to have flood insurance. And you can see I pulled up that Whitehall neighborhood, right? There's floodplains that run right through it. But as you can see, it's a small percentage of the houses. And from one side of the street to the other, it's a big difference. You can be in this house right up here, and then all of a sudden across the street, your neighbor's in a floodplain. Now, I tell people all the time, again, because it's not the entire area and it's just small sections, you'll usually notice a drastic difference in prices. A lot of times when people send me a house in this area and they're like, man, this price just seems too good to be true. A lot of times that's because it requires flood insurance. Now, this is an important factor to know about floodplains in our area. This isn't one of those things that it's like, yeah, I get it, Brandon. Now I got to pay this extra fee to my insurance for flood insurance. No, we have flooding in our area. And it's something I want to point out here. As you can see, these effective dates, 2018 here, and I think 2017 over here. Back in 2015, we had what they call the 1,000-year storm. When you look at flood rating, it's all based on ratings. We had that 1,000-year storm, and they really got to test the theories of where these floodplains are. And they have since redrawn them since a lot of those. And so when you see a floodplain in some of these areas, don't just think it's an extra fee. There's a chance that your house might actually flood. But again, we talk to our clients all the time that love this area, and we teach them how to avoid those floodplains. So again, don't feel like you got to cross the area off. It's about 25% of the homes or less that actually are in those floodplains and require flood insurance. And of course, the further north up you go, the higher you get in elevation that pushes you away from those lower streams and creeks. And I know I brought up being a more dense area, but it does bring up, of course, the con that I can't forget to mention of traffic that comes with it. You know, being all that shopping center here, especially during Christmas time, you assume everybody buys on Amazon, but trust me, during the holidays, the traffic over here can truly be a nightmare. And those that live around the mall or the complexes just feel that weight of that. But let's talk about pricing real quick, and then we'll head over to Chapin. Pricing. So on that Irmo side, the Irmo High School side of things, you're looking at an average of $305,000. Again, people feel like their money goes a little bit further. Now, with that said, I did break it down because on that Dutch Fork side, a little bit more expensive because of those pros I talked about, a little bit more space, a little bit more land in some of those neighborhoods. You're looking at $342,000 on average. All right, next up, we're diving into Chapin. Now, Chapin, just like some of the other areas, you have what is the town of Chapin, but then as well, you have the zip code that makes up Chapin. So when you're looking into the area, what we're really talking about is the 29036 zip code that makes up Chapin, which is this area right here. Now, with Chapin, another big reason a lot of people like the area, again, like I talked about, when you have those school districts, the Lexington Richland 5 school district is made up of it. But like I talked about, various degrees of ratings when it comes to the actual high schools, elementary schools, and so much more. Chapin High School itself ranks pretty high on a lot of these sites here. So that's one of the big reasons people attract to the area. Now, with that said, and I'm going to switch the layers here so you can have an idea of the terrain, kind of give you a better perspective as we zoom in here. Chapin is a relatively small town type feel. As you can see, you kind of got the town here, and in that town, you're gonna have your major grocery stores to get your grocery shopping done. Everything else I tell people is gonna feel a lot more local, right? You're not gonna have a Lowe's or a Home Depot. You're gonna have an Ace Hardware. You're gonna have local restaurants and shops and things like that, which a lot of people attract to the area for. Then, with that said, I always tell people coming from the West Coast, kind of feels like a mountain town where you have that main town square. Then you got these 2-lane roads roads that kind of roll off to where all the living actually is. But instead out here being mountains, you're rolling through the lake coves. And obviously that's another big reason that a lot of people like this area is because look how much water frontage there is in Chapin. So many different opportunities to live on the lake. You have a lot of lake neighborhoods out here as well. You have a lot of public lake access to it. Dreher Island State Park right outside of Chapin. So that is why the capital city of Lake Murray is because of that. Now, with that, of course, pros, cons. Some of the pros that people like about the area also roll into some of the cons of why people don't like the area. Very popular neighborhood out here in Chapin. You're going to have Timberlake Country Club. It is the one and only golf course that is on Lake Murray, and you have tons of different neighborhoods that surround it. And there's a marina in the neighborhood and so much more. But as you can see, 13 minutes just to get from the neighborhood back to actual downtown Chapin. So with that said, if you're one of those that actually have to drive back to Columbia, you can see how fast that commute can start pushing, where you're talking 40 minutes. So obviously this is where location really matters in this area if you are somebody that's having to commute. Obviously the further east in Chapin that you get, the closer you're going to be to the area. But that's one of the big things I hear from people, because 2-lane roads, trying to get back, it can just start feel overwhelming. And at the same accord, like I talked about, very small town. So if you're one of those that wants those bigger chain stores, you want the Costco's, you want to get to that. As you can see, if you're in some of these coves, you're talking a 30-minute drive just to get back to some major shopping. Again, just as many people I have absolutely love the area because they're seeking out that smaller town feel. Yes, you do have a lot of new construction development coming to this area, but at this point, for a lot of people, it doesn't feel as saturated as a Lexington does. It still has that small town vibe, less densely populated, but as you can imagine, just like everywhere else in the Midlands, it is growing, new construction developments popping up. So that traffic can pick up, especially that these are 2-lane roads. It just can start to wear on people after a while. So again, a lot of pros to the area, but those are the cons that are here as well. Now again, hopefully that didn't mislead you with the cons I mentioned, because this is a highly desired area and you can see it in the average price point. Again, removing those homes off the lake that we will dive into later, on average, you're talking $434,000. Obviously a little bit higher than some of the other areas that we've talked about already. Now, let's dive into some of those in-town neighborhoods. This is an area a lot of people overlook simply because of blanket statements they hear about Columbia. But this area actually checks a lot of boxes for people once they start diving in further. And what we're talking about is areas like Forest Acres, neighborhoods like Heathwood, Shandon. So what's all the hype about these areas? Well, one, these are going to be those older established areas like I talked about. Neighborhoods with character, neighborhoods with tree-lined streets. Two, you're going to have walkability in some of these areas. As we zoom in here, as you can see, Divine Street is kind of a main shopping corridor. You have restaurants like Cantina 76, you have shopping and so much more. And of course, if you live in one of these neighborhoods, because they are those older established neighborhoods, the way they were built prior to cul-de-sacs that people started requesting, you can easily just walk from your neighborhood right out to Divine Street and grab a bite to eat. Or on this side, you head over to 5 Points. I know a lot of people talk about 5 Points as the college district. Yes, don't get me wrong, at night after college games, trust me, they got bars that run all night. But you head out there during the day and you'll be surprised. You have a lot of these people that live in these older established neighborhoods that come over to these really good brunch spots, these really good lunch spots they have over here. So this is one of those areas that a lot of people attract to locally, but a lot of outsiders don't know about because they're like, oh, it's Columbia. Now, with that said, this is another thing that a lot of people miss. When you pull up these schools, recently, U.S. News ranked Dreher High School and AC Flora High School that these areas feed into as some of the top schools in the state. And they actually beat out some of those schools over in Lexington that we talked about earlier. So that's why I say this is an area that is hugely overlooked, but has a lot of pros that a lot of people, I just say, are missing. I've had a lot of clients, just to be honest, that started their search in Lexington because they were told online that's where they need to look. And they came to town. We went around Lexington. They're like, this really doesn't match my vibe. And once they started explaining their vibe, they said, let's go check out Shandon. We drove into Shandon. They're like, This is what we were talking about, Brandon. But again, they overlooked it because everybody told them online of where to buy it. And that's why these breakdowns are really important. And again, I really don't have to pull up commute times in here because as you can see, this is where a lot of people say it's a 15-minute city where you can literally get to anywhere in Columbia within 15 minutes. You're literally in proximity, obviously depending on where you are a little bit further, but you have all that. And the other benefit a lot of people have of these areas is even though they're older established, you got a lot of updating comes in here, especially when it comes to the shopping center. Our first Trader Joe's, like I said, they're building another one allegedly over in Irmo, but our first Trader Joe's was over here. You see, you have Whole Foods Market. You have a little bit more of those higher end shops in Forest Acres and so much more. So a lot of people do attract to this area. And it's one of those local hidden gems that I may get myself in trouble by letting this secret out. Now, what are the cons of this area? So one of the biggest things I hear is, again, being older established, you don't have those newer construction neighborhoods with cul-de-sacs, with amenities. This isn't going to be that way. As well, with older homes, does tend to be more maintenance, right? When you have homes that were built in the early 1900s, you're talking about before ground wires were built into houses. So you're not going to have GFCI plugs everywhere. These are things that some people just get scared and overwhelmed by because they want everything to be modernized. And while you can find it out here, it comes with a price tag. And we'll hit that before I hit one more con that you'll want to hear about. Because again, this is another area that's older established, maybe save some money. On average in these areas, you're talking about $504,000. That's right, the highest price average that we've seen as we're breaking down these areas. Again, this is a highly sought after area. Now you can find some pockets where your money goes a little bit further. Areas like Rosewood, not as expensive. Now, with that said, that wraps up with the last con. I've had a lot of people that live in this area that says, look, Brandon, we live in Shandon and we absolutely love it. We live in Old Shandon, we absolutely love it. But next neighborhood over, not so much. There's a lot of variety in here, just like I talked about in Northeast Columbia. You can literally have $1 million homes, and across the street, you can have $180,000 homes. There's that much discrepancy in this. And some people want a little bit more uniformity. Now, I tell people all the time, one of the challenging things in the Midlands of South Carolina is there's not a lot of uniformity, as I talked about earlier. So it's something that's hard to find anywhere, but there is a lot of variance over here. Now, before we dive back into how much it actually costs to live on Lake Murray, and then take you on some tours of some neighborhoods so you can see how far your money goes. One of the most common requests we get, we're talking places like Elgin, Gilbert, Pillion, Gaston, Swansea, and so many more. So on paper, it's easy to see the appeal. Your prices stretch further. You start to find a little bit larger lots, a little bit more space between the houses. And there's still a surprising amount of new construction that looks like a bargain compared to some of the other suburbs that we looked at. But here's the part that doesn't always show up in the online listing photos. Once a lot of these people actually drive these areas, a lot of them, just to be honest, change their mind. The vibe kind of really shifts fast. It's not what people expect. Now, don't get me wrong. We still have plenty of buyers that buy in these areas because if you do value space, privacy, and lower price points, rural living can be an amazing fit. But it's critical to know what you're signing up for before you fall in love with an online listing because these aren't just cheap suburbs. They're rural. And with all the pros that come with it, there's a lot of trade-offs that come with it too that we got to dive into. Let me just kind of give you the blanket overall look before we dive into each of these areas further and give you price points of them. 1 minute, you're going to be in that well-kept subdivision. But the next, you're on a 2-lane road with a mix of maybe horse farms, manufactured homes, and some older properties that don't exactly match what you had in mind. Grocery stores, restaurants, daily conveniences, they can be 20 to 40 plus minute drives. Some of these areas have no zoning, right? It's what some of you want. I don't want an HOA. I don't want anyone to tell me what to do. But at the same accord, that means you might have that brand new farmhouse and right next to it, a buy here, pay here lot where they're selling used cars. Or next to it, a cluster of mobile homes, right? It's that rural mix. And when we look at these areas on the overhead, you can see it, right? When we talk about the areas we talked about before, right? You have all of these populated areas where all the shopping and living is going to be. And then once you leave those corridors, you can see how quick things shift outside of that. And that's where it changes, right? Because you go from
shopping, homes, restaurants, daily needs, to a whole lot of nothing, just to be 100% honest. And it's not what people expect. In other videos, I've broken down the density populations, and they're drastically different from one to the other. And so that's the biggest thing to keep in mind from an outside perspective. If you're like, hey, Brandon, what are these areas all about? I see some really good deals on there. Absolutely. But again, you got to understand what you're signing up for. So again, the main areas that we have people attract to, and they're all a little bit different in their own sense. You have Elgin and Lugoff out this direction here. And to give you an idea of price in this area, on average, you're looking at $314,000. Again, money goes a little bit further than some of these areas, but as you can see, a little bit more spread out. Downtown Elgin, you're going to have your grocery stores, some pizza stores, Mexican restaurant, but anything further, you're pushing back to Northeast Columbia, which again, if you're on this far side of Elgin, doesn't seem that bad. But once you start pushing further and further back, it goes a little bit further. Now, you can cross over and start heading into Camden. They do have a little bit more there, but I know so many people that there's just not enough shopping within proximity when it comes to these areas. The next area we'll have to talk about is Eastover and Hopkins. This is another area here a lot of people reach out, and their average, to give you an idea, is $275,000. Again, a lot of new construction out this direction as well. Now, with that said, a lot of these in this area, a little bit more densely populated, not as much of the spacing. Now, there's a reason for that, I tell people. So whenever there is no public utilities available and you have to be on septic tanks, those septic tanks do require a larger lot to accommodate those drain fields. But you do see your price going further. And again, as we zoom in here, as you can see, once you kind of leave this corridor of what I truly consider still part of downtown Columbia, that's when you roll into these areas. And again, you're going to get some shopping centers out here. You can see your food line and stuff like that, but you're really pushing back into Columbia to get your shopping. So depending on how far out you are is going to determine how far that commute is going to be back to the area. Now, another reason I bring up this area that becomes really popular is for military. One, on this side, again, Fort Jackson right around the corner, but two, east of this, heading out to Sumter, you have Shaw Air Force Base. And for some people, this happens to be the happy median in between. And as you can see, McIntyre Joint National Guard Base. And so you do have a lot of military that do buy in this area as well, just because of those proximity to those different areas. And the last rural areas we're going to be talking about is Gaston Pillion and then heading over to Gilbert, kind of the outlays of Lexington. Now, to give you an idea, on the Gaston Pillion side, you're looking at an average of $273,000. Headed over to the Gilbert side, a little bit more pricey, and again, removing those lake homes because some of Gilbert does land on the lake, you're looking at $314,000. Now, on this south side of Lexington, again, this is where we were talking about earlier, South Lexington. We're seeing a lot of builders push out this direction. One, because they did start getting public sewer out that direction, so they didn't have to have those neighborhoods that were on septic. You do still have some of those out there, so they could start building smaller land neighborhoods for a price that just attracts to a lot of people. But again, as you can see, you're going to be a bit of a commute just to get back to that shopping because, hey, as I talked about before, even if you're not only driving back to the White Knoll area, sure, you can hit Walmart, but if you're looking out to go out to dinner, it's going to be pushing even further, or you're going to be heading back to Columbia. Again, another growing popular area is going to be the Gilbert area. Now, this area here has been perceivably growing for years. When I first moved to the area, I told people all the time, I worked for the county, and the county at that time said, hey, everything's moving west, and it was moving out to the Gilbert area. However, the land didn't come up for sale, and everything moved south, and that's where the Red Bank and White Knoll area grew. However, we're starting to see some of that break free in this Gilbert area. Now, as you can see, their prices were still a little bit higher than some of the areas we saw because it's still a relatively desirable area outside of it being rural. You know, you do have some very popular neighborhoods out this direction. And again, you have that proximity to the lake. So again, don't think that it's going to be so cheap out this direction, just being a little bit more rural. But at the same accord, as you can see, zooming in here, it's going to be a little bit further drive back to that. Now, with that growth, we're starting to see some more shopping centers. They're building a Target shopping center out this direction that was recently announced. And so it's making amenities a little bit closer, but as you can still see, still a very rural area out in the Gilbert area at this point. So many people reach out about Lake Murray and, hey, can I afford a home on Lake Murray? And we're going to talk about that here. Now, we kind of break it down differently, but I want to show you it real quick just to give you perspective. So Lexington County, as you can see, makes up a majority of it. But you do have this section right up here that is Richland County. Then on the far northwest side, you have Newberry County, which is actually where Dreher Island State Park is. And then on that far southwest side, you have the Saluda County side. Now, again, we break it down slightly different when it comes to our area. How we really break it down is going to be this Lexington side. Then you're going to have the Irmo and Chapin side, and then those other areas that we talked about, the Newberry and Saluda side. And each of these areas are a little bit different as well. Their price point is different. And so I'm going to break down what you can expect in each of these areas. So first, getting started over in Saluda County. This is going to be the most budget-friendly part of the lake. Now, what you can expect out here is wooded lots, kind of peaceful water views. Actually, some of the best water views I've seen out this direction. You're going to get less boat traffic out here. Now, keep in mind, you'll also be farthest from some of the major job center and services like grocery stores, healthcare are just going to be that longer drive. And this is going to be the same thing heading over to the Newberry County side, where again, money goes a little bit further, but you're trading proximity to big box shopping and that more rural lifestyle. But again, you get those larger lots, quieter coves, and lower price points. And so it's perfect if you want privacy on this west side of the lake and don't mind a commute back to downtown Columbia. Because for instance, Big Man Marina, you can see on that far side of the lake heading into those counties is about a 50-minute commute back to downtown Columbia. Now, of course, you're going to have other grocery shopping closer to downtown Columbia, but hopefully it gives you proximity of how far these areas really are from those central shopping hubs. Now, circling back, again, like I said, your money goes a little bit further. So to give you an idea, on the Saluda County side, the average home on Lake Murray since the beginning of the year came in at $680,223. Now on the Newberry County side, that average came in at $814,439. Now, with that said, recently out in Newberry County, we saw a neighborhood pop up, Stewart's Landing. This development was sold off as lots and people bought them, and we're starting to see some custom homes being built out that direction. So is it a shift that we're starting to see as you'll see the Irmo and Chapin and Lexington side get a little bit more pricey, people pushing further and further out into these rural areas to make their dollar go a little bit further. Now we circle back to the Irmo and Chapin side, that northeast side of the lake. Now again, this is often called the capital Lake Murray because Chapin and Irmo makes that small town charm with that lakefront coves and big water views that you get in these areas. And you'll see everything on the lake from classic brick homes to some brand new high-end build that look like those mansions, right? Slightly more affordable than the Lexington side, but again, you're talking about 2-lane roads and longer drive to major shopping on the Chapin side, and then Irmo just feeling a little bit more densely populated. And to give you an idea, their average sales price came in at $1,114,387. Now we roll over to the Lexington side. This again is going to be that most developed stretch of the lake. You're going to be closest to downtown Columbia, shopping corridors. You have those top rated schools, which again, you still do have in Chapin, but it really makes it a magnet for those full-time residents, just having proximity to everything. Now again, you'll find newer construction, renovated older homes, but plenty of boat ramps and marinas throughout this side of the lake. Now the trade-off, again, is going to be the priciest side of Lake Murray. And again, we talked about before, with that growth, with that proximity, traffic can be high in these areas coming out of these coves and trying to get anywhere. But to give you an idea, the average sales price came in at $1,549,761. But it always brings the question of, can I afford Lake Murray? And pulling up here on my website, as you can see, looking at 3 bedrooms, 2 bath, active on the lake right now. And these are homes that do include docks, because giving a little bit of context when I was giving those average numbers, that's giving you general on the lake. Talked about this on plenty of other videos. Not everybody gets a dock, but either way, whether these were shared docks or private docks, as you can see, low end, what you're looking at is $550,000 out in Prosperity active. That one's actually contingent sale and closing right now. But as you can see, this is kind of the low end of what to expect on Lake Murray. As you can see on the high end, this does push really high, really fast, where you're talking upwards of $3 million on the lake.
All right, so I know it's been a long journey, but remember how we got started. Have you researched Columbia, watched every video you can find, and still feel lost? Look, if that was you, hopefully this map tour cleared the fog a little bit. I mean, we've broken down the Midlands region by lifestyle, budget, and the different vibes. So you can see exactly how each pocket fits together and where your dollar actually stretches most. Now, here's the key takeaway. The best fit for you might not be the neighborhoods everyone in those Facebook group keeps hyping. I mean, I've seen that regret before. Columbia isn't a one-size-fits-all market like so many others are. It's that mosaic of small pockets, each with its own vibe, rhythm, price point, and trade-offs. So don't fall for the best areas to live videos. What's best for me might not be best for you. And the only way to match the right house to the right lifestyle is to start with the map, not the listings. So if you're ready to narrow it down even more, my team and I are here to help you cut through the noise and find the neighborhood that truly fits you. I mean, we've created guides so that you can now get on the ground and see these areas without driving around feeling lost. And before you leave, you'll want to check out the playlist on the screen, where I actually break down some of these areas and the neighborhoods even further, giving you more of those pros and cons and who these areas might actually be for. Otherwise, we'll see you on the next episode.